I like to clarify, we're talking about illegal immigration, because people
Illegal
always ask
immigrants,
my
not
thought of
immigrants. Yeah.
immigrants. In 1997, I went to Korea. While I was in Korea, I went to the DMZ, and I hear this a lot about securing the border, and that one trip taught me one simple thing. Unless you put a demilitarized zone on our southern border, you're not going to secure it. You could put any fence you want, they're going to dig underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is the reward for being here far outweighs the risk. So this is my thought, because you can't round people up like the Gestapo and send them back. You're right. As soon as you started shipping them back to other countries, you're breaking apart families, then you become the bad guy. So how do you solve the problem for all the people that were
Well,
here?
now the breaking apart family, that would be the parents' choice if they want to leave the kids here. That's them doing it right, not
but
us per se.
But if you're the ones actually going into a house and handcuffing a father and taking him out, it leaves public perception. And in this battle, we have to win over the hearts and minds of the public. So how do you do it? You enforce the laws that we have. If a business isn't allowed to hire an illegal, if a school isn't required to educate illegals, if there's no reward for being here, I think you would find they would go home all on their own.
Well, the laws we have now require rounding them up and deportation.
Well, this is true, but you can enforce, the laws also require business to run a background check, and most businesses don't do it.
So what you've said, though, basically is they'll still be here, but they won't legally be able to get a job. Doesn't that kind of perpetuate a real serious problem that we have?
We have that problem currently.
Exactly. Is that something you want us to continue to have? Is there a way to deal with that? Because we can't, like you said, we can't really round them up and ship them home.
But see, if you punish the businesses, then how could they get an illegal
You're saying
job?
encourage them to voluntarily deport.
They would deport themselves. If they couldn't work and their kids couldn't get educated.
Have you seen the way some of them live in Mexico?
I've seen horrible
Living here with no
conditions.
job would be better.
Well,
Anyway, thank you.
yeah.
Okay, one of the questions you had not yet gotten to in the questionnaire is one that I'd like to find out what your answer is.
I read them all, so I have an answer for it.
Okay. Please describe what specific circumstances governmental rights or interests should override parental rights or interests in regard to the welfare of children.
I don't think there are any other than the actual physical life of a child. And what I mean by that is, if a child is being abused, then I think the state has a right to protect the child from the parent. But other than that, if you talk about education or medical decisions, I don't think it's the state's right to override what a parent wishes for their family. I find it hard to believe. I read stories about kids that are snatched up because the parents don't agree to a certain type of operation. I think at some point, it's your child, it's your decision. We trust you with everything else. We have to trust you with raising your own kids.
So along those lines, there are some religious groups that are against, if you want to say, modern medicine, a lot of the techniques that modern medicine uses.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that situation, if the medical establishment believes that that's necessary to preserve the life of the child, which way should that go?
That goes to the parents. That's their decision. It's not the government's responsibility to tell you how to live or how to believe. The government was not formed to do that.
Okay, and then the final question before they reset the clock on me. You hit the key word abuse, and I agree, but there are probably 6 different definitions of abuse in this room alone. So how do you determine what is abuse and what's not abuse? Who's the final authority on that?
This is the tricky part of it, and I'll tell you my belief. Federally, I don't believe it's an issue. I believe this is a state's issue. Federal government should not mandate on the states how to write these laws and control their citizens. The states have not come together and formed a government to be told how to deal with every single issue. So I would pass that back down to the states. My goal is to get things away from the federal government.
Dennis?
There are a lot of things that the government does that they were not intended to do. You know, Department of Energy, Labor Department, EPA, all those things. We need a whole lot less government, and actually we're getting more government.
Mm-hmm.
So what steps can we take, what steps could you or the folks in Washington, D.C. take to start thinning down the government and eliminating some of these agencies and letting, again, the states make those decisions.
I think this is a two-pronged problem. The first one, we have to convince people that they don't need the federal government to take care of them. What I work on is people that talk about the Department of Education, and I ask them, why federally? Why not have a state Department of Education, allow the state to do it? When they talk about welfare assistance, that's great, but why do we send the money to the federal government for them to dictate how we give it back to the people in our state? Why not let the state handle these issues? And if your state decides to have a welfare program or a Department of Energy or these other things, then they can allow it. So we have to educate people and make them understand that you don't need the federal government to take care of you. That's not what it was designed for. The other part of the problem is the federal government's allowed to bring in too much money, and through that money is how they get power and size. And so we need to stop that. And this is why I like to talk a lot about zero-based budgeting. Because if you cut off the amount of money the federal government's allowed to spend, then they're going to shrink in size because they won't be able to sustain themselves. And I think this is one of the goals, one of the things that we have to achieve.
So you think in the budget, we ought to just basically defund the DOE or some of those things?
I think
they had chances to do it this past year. They always have chances to do it.
I think as Congress, constitutionally, if you read the powers of the House of Representatives, that's their two powers, the power of impeachment and the power of the purse. And so those are the two things that congressmen need to take grasp of again and utilize. I see all these politicians come and talk around Texas about the EPA stopping our oil production. You have the power federally to shut off funding to the EPA. So if they attack your state, attack them at a federal level, but they're scared to do it. And so we need to elect people, like I said, that are not scared, that are not worried about their next election. They're worried about doing what's the right thing. And this is what I think. When I win the election and we go to Washington and we start trying to implement these things, if the people don't like it, then in 2 years, they're going to vote me out of office. They're going to vote for someone else. And I hope that person is just as conservative as me.
And that's also why we need to get rid of the 17th Amendment.
Yeah.
So somebody would care about the states.
That was the point. And a lot of people don't know this, but the founders, they argued about the Senate for a long time because they didn't want it to be a branch of the federal government. And so originally the idea was, let's have the House of Representatives vote for the Senate. And then somebody came up with the brilliant idea of allowing the states to vote for it because then they would be accountable to the states and it would be protection from the federal government for the states. And so 17th Amendment, when they did that, it's just been downhill since.
Some morons.
So I don't use that word, but
Entitlements.
okay.
Right now we have so many people getting free stuff from the government, from the federal government, from cell phones, food stamps, and I'm not talking about Social Security. Social Security was paid in by the people that worked.
Okay.
Okay, so how are we going to undo that?
And I'm glad you brought the Social Security up because I'm a big fan of that. People always lump Social Security and Medicare in with entitlements, and that infuriates me because you paid into Social Security and Medicare, so you're not receiving entitlements to get what you paid into. You know, food stamps, Obama phones, housing. I've read the Constitution a lot. I've gone through it, and I can't find a section in it that talks about life, liberty, and free stuff. The government's just supposed to provide you the opportunity to pursue your happiness. It's not supposed to give you the basic needs to survive. I always make the joke that there's really not truly a poor person in America because I've gone to other countries and I've seen people that live 15 people in a mud shack and are starving to death. I've seen small children under the age of 10 pick up a gun to fight, and they're not fighting for their own freedom, they're fighting for food. And so people here in America don't understand what's going on around the rest of the world. The way we get rid of it is we have to slowly curtail those programs, but we have to remember that those people that are addicted, and they are addicted to the federal money, they are American citizens too. And as our brothers and sisters, it's our responsibility to make sure that we take care of them and take care of them by allowing them to take care of themselves. We can't just dump them out in the cold because that would cause a crisis that's bigger than what we have right now. So we have to slowly, gradually reduce these programs, take these things away from them. Some of them would be easy. The phone, take the phone away from them. Food stamps equals about $5 a day. You could cut back a lot on the food stamps. I'm a big fan of food stamps. Let it go back to a stamp where they can get rice, beans, potatoes, powdered egg, and powdered milk. It's just for certain foods because it's supposed to sustain you, not provide you a card where you can buy a steak and lobster at the grocery store. But it needs to be done, and we need to get that out of the federal government's hand and send it back to the states. If the state has extra money where they want to send out a lot of welfare, allow them to do it. And if your state doesn't, then you don't.
Perfect timing.
We're getting ready to be on 30 minutes of questions and answers in about half a minute. First question is, you obviously are a very well scholared constitutional person. What made you decide to run in a United States race instead of a local or a state race?
It's simple. I ran for this office, one, because this is my home district, and I think that my opponent is the epitome of the problem in Washington. From the first day he got there, when he voted for the Medicare Plan D prescription drug bill, which is a huge entitlement system, and he did it because the party leaders wanted him to, he showed that he didn't have the courage to stand on his own 2 feet and vote how his conscience told him. He was going to vote how he was told. And to me, the proof really in that is the debt ceiling increases. There have been 13 of them, and he's voted for 6. So either you're for raising the debt or you're not. It's party politics, and it's what needs to stop. I ran for U.S. Congress because I think it's the place I can make the biggest impact, the fastest. I think I'm the person that has what it takes to go up there and awaken certain people in this country to do what I'm doing. Because I think there are a lot of young men and women just like me around the country that haven't ran for office because they're scared. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. And so I'm laying out a roadmap. This is what you do. First, you get in your mind that you can do it. You understand what you're trying to do. You find like-minded people and you go for it. And you can accomplish anything because this is America. The American dream is still alive. It's still possible. And what is greater American dream? Not becoming a billionaire, but becoming a representative of this country that can truly write and change law to bring freedom back to our shores. And so that's who else better than a Marine to do it? This is why I'm doing it. So.
What do you know about Agenda 21, and what would you do to inhibit or stop it from coming into the U.S. government system?
My understanding, I'm not as knowledgeable on Agenda 21 as some people are, but my understanding is it takes away individualism and it's about the community, what's best for the community. We're going to tell you how to live and what to build and what to eat and how to do, and it's about global warming. And I think that is the biggest scam that's been played upon the American people.
Which one? Global warming.
Global warming. It frustrates me when I hear them talk about CO2s and pollutants in the sky, and then I fly to Singapore or China for work, and you can barely see because there's so much nonsense in the air. Why is America destroying its economy when the rest of the world is pumping and drilling? And so I think we need to get on board with it. I agree, we need to be environmentally conscious, but we don't need to destroy our economic future trying to protect something that no one else cares about. But my understanding of Agenda 21 is that it's pushed by the United Nations, and everything about it should be shut down, and the people in America need to know about it, and they need to know that that kind of nonsense is what leads you to get a country like Russia where you all have the same house and car, except for the social elite that run the government that live 10 times better than you.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the term sustainability within that context?
No, sir. I would guess that it's about sustaining the planet with the max amount of people that are coming on it. And population growth is going to be a problem. There's 6 billion or 7 billion people now, and they're estimating, 10 billion by 2025?
So do you think federal programs ought to be implemented to limit our depletion of resources that we have available to us in some way?
No, and the reason why I'm going to say no on this, it sounds good, But like everything, it starts out with good intentions, and it gets corrupted because men are corruptible, and it goes the wrong path. And so we need to stop that.
I'm gonna ask a more pragmatic question. Now, understand your background, you've said it so far, but just to be sure, you're not a lawyer, correct?
I was not a lawyer.
All right, of course, not all congressmen or congresswomen are, but it does beg the question. Right now, we look at what's happened with Obamacare. Even if you like its intended purpose, no one could really like the fiasco of how that law was written and the way it's being implemented. So, assure us in some manner that any law that you write will actually be a well-crafted law, enforceable, and that will actually do what it's supposed to and not be worse than the disease you're trying to resolve.
Yeah,
How will you go about doing that?
and this is I get questions like this a lot, and so there's a few answers on this. First, you have to understand that you don't need an elected leader that knows everything about everything. If I did that, I would be a billionaire and I would live on an island somewhere. You want an elected official that understands how to make the right decision with the evidence that's put in front of him. If my office writes a law, you know it's going to be easy to read because I'm going to be able to understand it, and I'm not a lawyer.
Would it be easy to get around?
Now that I would have to have some lawyers on my staff to make sure that didn't happen, but I'm a big believer that I don't need to go write a lot of laws. I need to go repeal a lot of laws, because the problem with government is the size and scope of the federal government. And so the only way to fix that is to not write more laws. Sometimes writing more laws is not the answer to our problem. We need to go back and find the laws that got us where we are today and get rid of them. Things weren't perfect 100 years ago, but they federally weren't as bad as they are today. And so I think you don't have to necessarily write new laws to fix old laws. You need to go back and just strike old laws from the books.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, back on everyone's favorite topic of entitlements. Which ones are, which ones aren't. But I think the two that have been much discussed is Social Security and Medicare. And I think those who are in the financial knowledge area are almost universally agreed that they're in trouble.
They're insolvent.
So what is the solution to make them solvent, to make them affordable? And kind of as a spin-off on that, while we're talking about entitlements, one of the hot buttons right now is the extending the unemployment benefits.
Yeah.
So if you want to fold that in, you can.
No, I can hit all these real quick in 2 minutes. What we first need to do is realize that as American citizens, we're all adults, and we have the ability to at least discuss the problem. And what happens now is you can't talk about entitlement reform without all the attacks. So we need to first recognize Social Security and Medicare are insolvent. It's impossible to maintain them. Let's put that on the table. Once we understand that simple factor, then what do? Well, we made promises as a government to people. Why is the money not there? Because our government stole it and used it for other things. So we need to set a certain age, 16, 15, whatever age it is, those people are never going to pay into Social Security, and they're never going to receive from it. And we need to set up some other system for it, be it some sort of 401k or some other kind of system for them for retirement if they choose to put the money into it. Because I also think if you don't help people prepare for retirement, it could set up a disaster 80 years from now when everybody can't work and has nothing. Then the government needs to swallow the bullet and pay the money they owe for the Social Security. I think part of the problem with Social Security is originally it was intended you pay in and you get your money out, and they started using it for everything else. Your spouse can get it. Your kids can get it. If I died today, my kids could get my Social Security, and I don't agree with those things. That's what life insurance is for. It's not what Social Security was intended for. So we need to discuss the problems, and I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I definitely want to talk about, because there are people that have a lot of knowledge on some of these topics, and if we can just get on the table and lay all the evidence out, we're going to find a solution. What was the other one you brought up?
Well, unemployment benefits.
Oh, unemployment. Yeah, I read a great article about Holland. Holland had unemployment benefits that actually went up to 5 years. What they found is people were unemployed for 5 years. And so they cut it to 4. And people were unemployed for 4 years. And so then now it's all the way down to 1 year. And so I think we need to recognize our 3-year unemployment rate that we have right now is just encouraging people to be unemployed. But I think on top of that, part of the problem is the government's required to give the unemployment because the government is making everybody unemployed. The biggest hindrance to business in our country today is the federal government. If people would realize that the government regulation is what stops new business, and all the taxes that go along with it is what stops people from hiring new employees, then we could restart our economy if we allowed the American citizens to do what we do, and that's to succeed. So the unemployment, definitely not 3 years. It's a shame people sit around for 3 years on unemployment and then switch right to welfare, or get a job and then go back on unemployment.
Or disability.
Disability, yeah.
Disability. Yeah, and so it's the entitlement system, and we need to realize that federally, you can't do it from a federal government level. If you want these things done, you can do it from a state. And what I've been explaining to constituents around the district is, this is why the founders were genius on this. If you do it at a state level, and you don't like what your state's doing, you can move. But when you allow the federal government to take this power and to implement these rules and regulations, there's nowhere left to go. We're stuck. And so we need to realize that. And if California wants to run their debt up and their whole society fall apart, they have to live with the consequences. It's the way the people of Detroit are realizing now, and the city workers are realizing we're not going to get the pensions we were promised. You should have recognized that 25 years ago. There are consequences for your actions, and as citizens, we need to be responsible for them.
How we going? Oh, I'm sorry.
You thought that was his question, didn't you? And you know what you were just talking about, something else this has come to light and recently is that federal government employees can take disability a week before they retire, and then retire at a much greater check than they would have got if they'd kept working that week. So that's a matter of federal law that can be changed up there. One of the promises that Ted Cruz made was that we'd get out of the UN. I mean, he's been there a whole year and we're still in the UN. So is that a matter of just cutting the budget and the contributions to the UN, or is there a bill or law that needs to be passed to minimize our involvement or reduce our involvement? I know we can't just jump out of the UN just like we can't deport 12 million people. We've gradually got to do it. But how are we going to get started down the road of reducing our involvement with the UN?
I do believe the UN has become such a corrupt body that it no longer serves a purpose. Now, for us to leave the UN, I think would be dangerous. I do believe that we shouldn't fund. It seems like we fund the UN. You know, we pay for almost everything that it wants to do. We should discuss setting up a matching payment with the 5 veto nations. All of them commit the same amount of money, and the UN functions on that. And I like being at that table where we have the right to say no to Russia and China. We need to be involved. The hardest part of freedom is bumping into people you disagree with and having the civility to sit there and talk to them and discuss issues and come to solve the problem. And this is the difficulty of the UN, is a lot of the people there hate us.